Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Aspen Institute's Murdock Mind, Body, Spirit series program. I'm Crystal Logan, Vice President of Aspen Community Programs here at the Institute, and I'm so thrilled to see you all here. First, I want to give our gratitude to Jerry and Gina Murdock for sponsoring this program. Jerry is a trustee, and we're really grateful to them for all that they've done for our community. So thank you. We're honored to feature our guest speaker today, John Powell. He's a globally recognized expert in the areas of civil rights, civil liberties, structural racism, housing, poverty, and democracy. He serves as director of the Othering and Belonging Institute at the University of California, Berkeley, the Institute at the University of California, Berkeley, which is a research institute whose mission is to identify and eliminate the barriers to an inclusive, just, and sustainable society, and to create transformative change toward a more equitable world. It sounds a lot like the Aspen Institute mission. That's great. John has written extensively on a number of topics, including structural racism, racial and social justice, voting rights, and the needs of citizens in a democracy. He received his bachelor's degree from Stanford, and he has a really cool story about how he chose Stanford over Harvard, and he got his law degree from UC Berkeley. He's the author of several books, including Racing to Justice, Transforming Our Concepts of Self and Other to Build an Inclusive Society. We're fortunate to have you here. We're honored to feature you, and we're fortunate to have our president and CEO, Dan, as our moderator today. So with that, over to you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. So this is a fantastic opportunity. I am so proud that we're hosting you and I have a chance to talk with you. My fantasy is that this would be a class. We'd be team teaching. I don't know if you'd have me though. So but a lot of people in our world have been following your work for years. Many of the programs of the Aspen Institute have taken inspiration from John's thinking. This idea of belonging and how it relates to othering, and then these other big concepts like targeted universalism. These words get thrown around the Aspen Institute so much that we almost feel like it's part of our own vocabulary, but you're the one that's helping to give us those terms. So A, thank you. And B, this group would probably love to learn a little bit about your background, maybe this intriguing Harvard, Stanford story, but as you're an eminent thinker, scholar, and leader, but how'd this happen? How'd you grow up? And what sort of brought you into the world of thinking about and writing about social justice issues, racial justice, and other topics?
So thanks, Dan, and it's great to be here. And as I said to Dan, we're gonna do this course, and hopefully some of you will be co-teachers and students, and it will be students of yours. So let's make it happen. Okay. You know, I don't know if many of you know the work of Joanna Macy. She's a friend of mine. She lives in the Bay Area. She's referred to sometimes as a Buddhist eco-feminist. When we first met, she said, "So John, tell me your story." And my response to her was, "Joanna, we all have many stories. None of them are complete. Even if they're true, they leave stuff out." She said, "Of course, so just pick one." So when people ask me about my story growing up, there are many different aspects of it. I think that that's not just coy, it's actually important that we don't live a single story. We have multiple stories, and it's important that we have access to those multiple stories and invite people to come into those stories in different ways. I'm 6 of 9, and my father was a Christian minister. I have this incredibly loving family. And I left the church when I was 11. And it was a real rupture in my family, because my family was not one of these families that once in a while goes to church. We go 3 and 4 times a week. People really believed it, still very much so. And at the end of each church service, there was a question. The question was, there was an invitation for a question and not a question. So the invitation was, okay, so we're in the service. Does anyone have any questions? Excuse me. And at 11, it hadn't occurred to me that no one had ever asked a question. And I stood up, and it was an audible gasp. He's going to ask the question. And I asked the question. And the question was, and this is in Detroit, where it was basically a black and white city. And I asked the question, what's going to happen to the Chinese? Which created another gasp and confusion. It's like, what? And the minister preaching that day he was not flummoxed. He said, okay. And he took me around different parts of the Bible trying to answer the question. And he really couldn't answer it. I never went back to church. And I believed then, in a way that I don't now, but I thought I was going to hell. But it struck me as fundamentally inconsistent and wrong to send, at that time, China had about 900 million people, not quite a billion, but to send 900 million people to hell who had never even heard of Jesus. Yeah. And so I was tormented because I thought, okay, I'm joining these Chinese. I don't even know them. But it started me on a search. And the other thing is that I have always had an interesting relationship with the universe or God, or however you might talk about it. And so this is a more poignant story in some ways. I remember, again, at 11, partially because of the break with my family, and feeling really like alone and not wanting to be here. And so crying and looking up at the sky, the night sky, and just saying, you know what, I want to go home. I don't want to be here. This is not my place. And the response came back. And the response was, you can go home when your work is done. And it's like, okay, I'm on it. And I've been doing that work. And the work was always, in some ways, doing work in service of something greater than me. And my students are very unhappy with that answer because they're trying to make decisions about their lives. And should they do this? Should they do that? And they say, how did you do it? I said, well, when I was 11 years old. But I've also been very fortunate. I feel like having from this loving, caring family, and then having a lot of opportunities. So that's what started me on this work, I think.
So say just a little bit about the path to your education, or your college, law school, how the sort of the life of the mind has connected to your interest in the life of the world.
So as I said, I'm 6 of 9 children, and my family did not necessarily value what they call worldly knowledge. I told people my father died recently. He died in 99. He had about 500 books in his house, and they're all the same book. There's the Bible. I kid you not, he had 500 different versions of the Bible. So for my family, it was strange to them that I was curious about all kinds of things. I told that story about China. The thing is, when I'm 8 years old, I'm reading textbooks about China, and it's like, to me, it was just curious. The whole world's like curious. And it created problems in school because they'd give us an assignment or we're going to study in the 9th grade, and I'd be done in like 2 weeks. It's like, and more. It's like, what do you mean more? It's, you gave us a textbook. I know I've read the whole thing. Now, what else? I mean, literally, that was a problem in school. So to me, knowledge, but also applied knowledge, trying to understand myself, the world, others. Even now, I mean, if you come to my house sometime, and hopefully you will, I sleep on a big bed, and half the bed is me, and the other half are books. When I read books, I read them like 4 or 5 books at the same time, and I put the authors in conversation with each other. Well, how would so-and-so respond to this? I've now since traveled and lived all over the world. India, my daughter was born in Tanzania, done original work in South Africa and Brazil. So to me, it's like one of the interesting things about life. But it's not just knowledge. It's knowledge in terms of how do we do it better? How do we learn from each other? And again, it was strange to my family. I was working, coming home in the summer working. I remember this. I was working at a foundry in Detroit, making $3.75 an hour after my first year at Stanford. And my parents said, well, since you got a good job, you won't be going back to college, will you? And I said, well, I think I am going to go back. And I said, why? You already have a good job. I said, I kind of like learning. And when I got ready to graduate from high school, I was a good student by traditional standards. And so I got a bunch of scholarships, including a scholarship to Harvard. And Harvard at the time did not allow women in. And I have 5 sisters. And, you know, I'm 16, 17 years old. I didn't have a vocabulary that you get, you know, later on in life. But it seems to me fundamentally wrong. How can this august, prestigious institution say that they wouldn't accept women? And so everybody was very proud, even though my parents weren't educators. They knew Harvard was a big deal. It's like, you're going to go to Harvard. Our son's going to go to Harvard. I said, nope. I said, what do you mean, nope? I said, why wouldn't you go to Harvard? They've offered you money. And I said, they don't allow women. And my mom said, what? So what? And I started searching around for schools that allowed women and that also had strong math and science programs. And Stanford popped up. And my parents said, if you don't go to Harvard, we won't help you go to college. And about halfway through Stanford, my mom came to me and said, your father's really upset. I said, why? I said, you haven't asked for any help. And so I went and asked for help, and he gave me $200, and that was it.
So two thoughts, then another question. One is, for everyone, it's clear you developed a global sensibility in the sense very early. This, you know, the question, the Chinese, means how does the rest of the world fit into our understanding of the world, the one we're talking about here? To me, that's fascinating. And then secondly, I grew up in a city that would have also been thought of at the time as black-white, Baltimore. And so you're just so excited to be able to hear some of your reflections about the American discussion around racism and equality. So before we get to that, though, I want to ask you a question that may be on the minds of some here, which is that so many people come to talks where they really want to engage the issues or classes, and they hold back from asking a question or making a comment because inside they sense, I don't have the right words. I don't want to ask the question the wrong way. I don't want to be the one that reveals that I haven't thought about something fundamental or says something that's going to then trigger other people. Do you have any advice for us as we engage in this?
Sure. So those of you know, I'm the director of the Othering and Belonging Institute. And one of the tenets of belonging is that it's co-created. And no one person, no one institution can actually do it. If it did, it's not really belonging. And so we have to do something together. And in my travels and studying, it seems to me fundamentally that we are interconnected. And so part of that is being vulnerable. Yeah. Part of it's bringing forward the things that we're wrestling with and embracing each other. And not because you have, you know, $50 words or, you know, someone's, you know, we'll make mistakes. That's part of life. And if we become too anxious about making mistakes, and one of the concerns, I had lunch with Andrea, and we talked about this. We're in a space now where everyone's sort of waiting to pounce. You know, like, oh, you didn't. Literally, this happened to me at Berkeley. I taught a class, and someone called me up, and they said, there's someone excoriating you on, you know, Twitter. And they're saying, F Professor Powell, he's an asshole, and I'm never taking the class from him again. And I said, well, okay, what's it about? And it turns out the person said, I didn't refer to them as they, but they never told me that, right? And it showed up in public, you know, in a big, and I reached out to the person. I said, well, would you like to have lunch? Oh, sure. He's very nice. They were very nice. But it seems to me that this sort of constant breaking, what we call breaking, is could really be the end of civilization as we know it.
Yeah.
And as we invite people in and to participate with vulnerability, with curiosity, with awe, it can't be so precious that you can't make a mistake, or even define what a mistake is. So I would invite everyone, either with us today or in the future, to be in a space where you can experiment, where you can grow, where you can make mistakes. Many of you probably have children. I remember teaching my son how to ride a bicycle, and we were riding, and he failed. And I said, okay, let's do it again. He said, no, that's all right. I said, what do you mean, no, that's all right? He said, I don't need to ride a bicycle. I'm gonna drive when I'm an adult. And what he was saying is that I made a mistake. And that's gonna be a boundary, not something I learn from, not something, and it's only when we learn through mistakes that we grow. I had a teacher in high school, and he said, when you give a test and someone gets 100, and I annoyed him a lot because I got 100 a lot, it's not a good test. I said, why not? Because it hasn't exposed what you don't know. A good test would actually help you see what you know, but also expose what you don't know. And so it seems to me that life is a constant thing of learning what we don't know. And what we don't know partially comes together when we're with each other. So I did postgraduate work in Tanzania. And I deliberately picked Tanzania because I wanted to sort of look at the world through the eyes of people who were not Western, and see the world how they saw it to the extent that I could. And I don't know if I was successful, but it certainly changed the way I saw the world. So we only do that when we, and there were so many mistakes I make. And I'll just give you one example. And I was with my partner, and this is a mistake actually she made. We were eating, and she stuck her hand into a communal bowl. She stuck her left hand. And it's like we can never eat communally again. Because in that society, the left hand is for cleaning yourself, the right hand is for eating. We didn't know, and we learned the hard way, and we were ostracized because of that.
Thank you. So your website has this really trenchant sentence. Othering is the problem of our time. Belonging is the solution. So let's start with the first part of that, that parallelism, othering. What is it?
Well, you know, it's all of us, when we think about it, have had the experience of being othered. You know, we go to a party and someone got to tell us that it was a formal party, and we show up in our, you know, gym trunks, or we show up at a party and it's a potluck and we didn't bring anything, and then we're ostracized. Othering is when we are, in some ways, discounted, and when we are looked down upon, when we're basically saying you're an outsider. And it happens in a personal level, but it also happens at a societal level. So when former President Trump said, you know, he didn't want Muslims here, he's othering a whole group of people. He's saying, you don't belong. This is not your place. You're not fully human. Until fairly recently, 1920, we said to women, yeah, you can cook and clean and whatever, but you can't vote. You can't be a lawyer. You're almost a citizen, but not really. And I often said, the man's castle was the woman's dungeon. That was a form of othering, saying, you're not a full human being. You know, regardless to what your politics are, when Hillary was running against Trump, I felt that Hillary would not win. I knew Hillary personally. And it's not because I thought she was a bad candidate, it's because she was a woman. At the beginning of that time, 20% of Americans felt that no woman, not Hillary, not Sarah Palin, no woman could be president. That was a man's job. That's a form of othering. So in our society, we have not just individuals saying you came to the party wrong, but we have society saying some people don't count. And one of the hard edges of that othering in our society is racism. And I've been reading the book White Rage by Carol Anderson. And I've read it many times, and reading again, it always sort of strikes me. I mean, the stuff that people said, that black people will never be allowed into their neighborhood or be able to go to school with their kids or be able to, and one of the things that's shocking is that In the early 20th century, at the beginning of the Great Migration, blacks were leaving the South in droves. And it's like, these are our blacks. They literally had laws passed, had police to saying blacks couldn't leave. So it's like, you're not a citizen, you can't vote, you can't go to school, but neither can you leave. Which is sort of interesting, because it's a kind of othering, but it's also a kind of dependence. And so, in a sense, othering denies the full humanity of people. And it's not just a conceptual idea. When we see people, normally, there's a part of the brain that lights up just from seeing someone who's human. Nature thought it would be kind of cool to sort of recognize our species. When someone's deeply othered, that part of the brain does not light up.
Yeah.
So there's literally a space at an unconscious level where we don't see someone as fully human. Belonging is just the opposite. Belonging, so this problem of othering, which we recognize in this country in terms of race, India they might recognize in terms of caste, someplace they might recognize in terms of immigration, someplace they might recognize in terms of religion. So many societies have, in a sense, a designated other, a formative other. The reason that that's important is that really, when we think about the othering process, it tells us more about the group and society doing the othering than the target itself. Mm-hmm. In fact, part of othering is deny the full humanity and expression of the other. So I'm not interested in what women have to say. I'm not interested in what blacks have to say. I'll tell you about women. I'll tell you about blacks. I'll tell you about Native Americans. I taught a class on on history of the United States, and I started off with the United States appropriating Native American land. And one of my students said, "This is a course about America. Why are we studying Native Americans?" I said, "We're not. We're studying America. This is America. This is not, you know nothing about Native Americans, except we took their land. They've been flattened into two-dimensional caricatures. So when we other people, we actually deny their full humanity, and it actually starts to define our humanity. Belonging is just the opposite. Belonging says not only does everyone belong and have complexity, that they get to co-create the thing they belong to and the thing we belong to. Co-create. So we're not asking them to join something that's already there, that's already set. So if you think about in the 1970s, large groups of women were coming into the workplace. At the time, in many workplaces, they had pornographic pictures on the wall. And a lot of women objected. And the response was, we've always had those pictures on the wall. No one ever objected, right? You can come in, but you come in under the rules, norms, culture that was set by the group that was excluding you. And so women were seen as not troublemakers. They're coming in and saying, we got to take down our pictures. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's where the concept of hostile workplace came. So sometimes we invite people in, but we invite them in as a guest. This is my house. These are my rules. These are my people. And you can come in as long as you behave appropriately. And when you stop behaving appropriately, I can ask you to leave. That's not belonging. We call that sort of a thin form of inclusion. So when we say belonging requires that everyone co-creates for everyone else. And it's not just belonging in terms of co-creation, that what do you need to actually fully belong? And Ashley from the Othering and Belonging Institute is sitting there, and she's our belonging coordinator. It's that people need to have agency. People have to be responsible. We're all responsible, all of us. We're co-creating, that's the good news, but it also means we're all responsible, which is different than saying we're all guilty. And we have to care about each other. And Ashley and I were talking about earlier today, it's like, because we don't work with corporations about belonging, it's like, can we say caring or loving in the context of corporations? Is that maybe that's too woo-woo. And so that's what belonging is. When belonging, we talk about a world where everyone belongs and no one is other. And some people push back and say, that's not possible. And I said, so what? So let's get to work. We've been called upon to do many things that's impossible.
So let me pick up that part for a moment about the not possible. Professor Powell gave us a model of that othering happens at the individual level, and that can be pretty complex because if we may be othering a group without fully knowing it, or othering it because our own identity seems to need that. Those are pretty complex things to break up, to sort of intervene for yourself, to uncondition yourself. So that's the individual level. Then there's the institutional level, the part where you come into a place where there's already been norms, structures, policies, practices, missions. It's a lot there. It's like pre-built. And then there's the cultural part, which is all of what we absorb around us in our lives, which again is part of the fabric of almost our pre-identity, almost some of it, I would imagine. Like it's hard to get away from let's just say if it's stereotyping, the stereotypes that are part of a culture that you grow up in, we're all conditioned into. Those are big things, individual, institutional, cultural. So I can appreciate what people would say, wow, that's so hard. But you're optimistic that at those levels, with intentionality, we can make progress.
We certainly can make progress. It's not clear we'll ever get there, but that's okay. I said my father was a Christian minister. The whole idea of Christianity is Christ-like. So which one of us has pulled it off? Right? It doesn't stop people from being Christians. It's like, well, man, you might as well quit. You're never going to be like Christ. It's an orientation. It's a way of sort of experiencing ourselves and thinking about the world. And you're right, Dan, it's at all these different levels. And so when we think about it, think about American Disabilities Act, which we say if you have a building or a structure, it's up to you to make the appropriate accommodations. That's actually a pretty amazing thing, right? It's saying, so if you build a building without a ramp, here comes someone in a wheelchair, the building is saying you're other. Yeah. The structure is saying you can't get in. Yeah. And we say you have an affirmative obligation within some reason to deal with that. Why can't we extend that to everything? And so structures and culture matter. It doesn't mean, so when we look at these things about being othering, it's not necessarily someone starts with a nefarious intent. And that's part of our problem. We assume that if something's wrong, there must be an evil wrongdoer behind it. And these are collective acts. We all have blind spots. So who would have thought that 20 years ago that it would be an all-gender bathroom, right? I mean, I didn't see that coming. And so and who we are is not done. We are constantly creating new expressions of ourselves. And I mean, it's amazing. Abraham Lincoln, the famous debate, Douglas-Lincoln debate, and Lincoln is saying, talking about freeing the enslaved. And Douglas turns to him and say, you know what? If he wins the president, he will let black and white people marry each other. And Lincoln says, are you crazy? No one would do that. This is the great emancipator, right? So something we're doing today, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, we'll look back on and say, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I missed that. So we have to do it at every level, but we also have to do it with a certain grace. So I'm a little bit conflicted, right? So when people say, let's take down the statute of, pick your poison, Washington, Jefferson. And then I was really nervous, frankly, is that somebody's going to turn and say, Jesus. You look hard enough. What's up with this dude hanging out with only other dudes, drinking wine? I'm just saying. Somebody might find that suspect. The point is that sometimes when we look back, we sort of look back through our own lens and judge our own lens and not sort of understand that people hopefully are continuing to learn and grow, and we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to use the wrong pronoun. It's not the wrong pronoun, it's contextual. And we can't fix that just at the individual level. We all are impacted by it, but as we become aware of it, we can do something. So I designed the building without an access ramp. Does it make me a bad person? Here's one of my favorite, since I used to fly a lot. Go on an airplane. There's a luggage rack on an airplane, and it's overhead. So at disadvantage, people who are shorter. At disadvantage, people with less upper body strength. Who are these shorter people with less upper body strength? Oh, women. We've designed the structure that's disadvantages women. And as a group, women are more likely to carry luggage, right? So what do women do? Many women check luggage. So it's an individual intervention for a structural problem, but you pay a tax. So now you have to get to the airport 45 minutes earlier to check your luggage. You leave the airport 45 minutes later after you pick up your luggage, if you're lucky, because it might not be there, right? And literally, when I flew here, and a woman getting off the plane turns to the men sitting around and said, "Can someone help me get that down?" And I felt like saying, you know, I studied this stuff. It's every place. Last one I give you for now. A woman walks into a hospital, true story. That's about in the paper about 3 weeks ago. She walks into the hospital. She's African American. Even the term, is African American the right term? Is BIPOC the right term? Is Negro the right term? Is colored the right term? It depends. These terms will continue to evolve, continue to have different meaning, and we will actually collectively engage these questions. But anyway, this African American BIPOC black woman walks into a hospital with her son, and she says, "I think he has COVID. Can you give him a test? I'm a doctor." And the staff there, some of whom are black, give the son oxygen tests using an oxygen meter. I don't know if you have those, which test the oxygen level in your body. And they said his oxygen level is fine. He does not have COVID. I think he has asthma. We'll give you some asthma medicine. You take him home and give him this medicine. She says, no. She said, I'm a doctor. My son does not have asthma. I believe he has COVID. They said, we just gave this test. We used this machine. And it says his oxygen level is close to 100%. Here's the kicker. It turns out that oxygen meters actually are distorted by the amount of melanin you have in your skin. And so now they've figured out that probably hundreds, if not thousands, of black people coming into the hospital were misdiagnosed and sent home to die. That's structure, right? And it's like, how did that happen? I don't believe anyone said, okay, here it is. Here's how we get the black population down. I think what happened is they tested it. So it's like, okay, we're going to run a test. And the test was on largely white people. So if they came to Aspen and did the test, yep. I'm just saying.
So there's sometimes when the problem is being actively perpetuated, isn't a matter simply of structural blindness or blindnesses that led to structural inequities. Right. And so that's harder.
That is harder, and it's very present now. So our society and the world is changing. These are global problems, so it's not just a U.S. problem. We see all around the world, and if you look at the rise of authoritarianism, there's a formula. You say you don't trust the government, you don't trust the media, everybody's lying, you can trust me though. And there are those people, the other, that's a threat to your society. You say, who are these others? Well, if you're in Turkey, they're immigrants. If you're in India, they're Muslim. If you're in Rwanda, they're Tutsis. If you're in South Africa, it's like, but same script, just sliding in different people. And part of what's being done is displacement. is that people feel anxious because we're going through a lot of change. We're still dealing with the pandemic, climate change. We don't know if we're going to have a future. People keep talking about robots taking our jobs. But although interestingly enough, there's been, as far as I know, no major demonstration against robots. Which, in terms of job loss, is much more important than jobs going to China or Mexico. But it doesn't have a human face. We prefer the other with a human face. Yeah. Although I do ask the question is that, so if robots take over our jobs, will black robots and white robots make the same amount of money? The point is that some people have figured out there's this anxiety and this fear. Tell a story to tell people who to direct the fear toward. People don't figure that out on their own. Everybody's sort of scared. It's like the future is scary. And then someone comes along and say, here, I'm gonna tell you why it's scary. It's the Muslims. It's the Mexicans coming up bringing drugs and raping our women. It's the black people, you know. So, and then it becomes a national story. It's not an individual story. And so that's strategic. People know that they can trade on that fear and create a hard other, and then bad things happen to that other. But here's the thing. People who are left of center's response is inadequate, because our response more often than not is that they got the facts wrong, right? Look at the data. So the stories of who not to trust, of what we call breaking and the other, resonates deeply at the unconscious level. We're not appealing to the prefrontal cortex. We're appealing to the amygdala. And the amygdala doesn't check facts. It doesn't care about facts. It cares about metaphors and stories and feelings. And so we're bad at telling stories. We're good at facts, but facts don't win. So we need to have better stories. We have stories about a future where we're all together. It's hard to even imagine that. I mean, we were talking earlier, right? Turn on television tonight, 5 channels are telling you about the terrible future when the robots take over, terrible when the government breaks down, or when people are driving cars into each other. All these stories to help us see a scary future. What are the stories to help us see a beautiful future, a loving future? They're simply not there. And so yeah, the people are deliberately doing this because they know if you can scare people, I can amass more power. Be afraid. All right, Dan, you convinced me. I'm afraid. What should I do? Listen to me. I'm going to save you. I'm the savior. And it has a cult and a spiritual dimension to it. And that's why it's so hard to break. We keep coming, January 6th, let's people see all the terrible stuff that Trump did. And it's like, we don't care. Literally, white evangelicals, and this is not me, saying they believe he's sent by God. And they will acknowledge, yes, God sometimes uses imperfect vessels. But it's God, man. I mean, you know, he knows what he's doing. And I said, well, maybe he's not a he, maybe it's they. Or anyway, we have to tell better stories that open up to a better future. The other thing we say is, don't be afraid. So some of you have children. May have had that episode where children are, it's like, there's a monster in the closet, or there's a monster under my bed, leave the lights on. And you say, honey, there's no monster under your bed. You turn the lights on and say, look, there's no monster under there. Can I turn the lights off now? And every kid knows that the monster only shows up when the lights are out. I don't know why parents don't get it. Yeah. The way to deal with fear is not to deny it, even if it's irrational. And we are a very anxious world right now. All these changes that are happening and speeding up that we can't process creates this fertile ground for anxiety and fear. And our response is don't be afraid, or go look at the numbers. Both of those responses are bad. And I'll give you an example of someone who did fear in a different way. And of course, I'm talking about President John F. Kennedy. So some of you are old enough to remember this. Many of you may have read about it. So the Russians, the Soviet Union, sent a man around the earth in the middle of a race when we had bomb shelters because we were worried about nuclear bombs. And we were told in school that we'd have area drills, and any day the Soviet Union could bomb Detroit. So put your head under your desk. And even as a 10-year-old is like, what the? They're talking about a nuclear bomb, and I'm supposed to put my head under my desk? Okay, something's not right about this. I'm trying to trust the government. So what Kennedy did, he gave this speech, gave it more than once, but once in Dallas, and he talked about, okay, so they look like they're ahead and they're scary because they're our mortal enemies and they're evil and all that. But you know what we're going to do? We are going to send a man to the moon before the end of this decade. We're going to build a rocket that's as long as this football field. We're going to use metals that have not been invented yet. When this rocket comes back to Earth, it's going to be traveling at 25,000 miles an hour. It's going to produce so much heat, it's going to be half the heat of the sun. So we have to build some new material that can withstand that heat. And we're going to do this collectively as Americans. One more part of the story. So a few months later, Kennedy is down at Cape Canaveral. He walks upon a black man who's a janitor, and he says, I'm John F. Kennedy, President of the United States, and my job is to keep America safe. He says, so who are you? And this guy says, I'm Frank Smith, and my job is to help America get to the moon. Kennedy told that story, and he united America so that a black janitor could feel like he was part of this noble thing of getting someone to the moon. So what happened to all that fear? Kennedy didn't say, don't be afraid. He told a story. He gave people something to believe in collectively. And it worked. It changed our educational system. There were a lot of collateral benefits from Kennedy's story. Kennedy was not a scientist. How do you know we're going to build a rocket as big as a football field? How do you know we're going to create some new material within 7 years? He wasn't saying someday. He said before the decade is over. So he took the fear and transformed it into an aspiration that we all could live, all could get excited about, and all could see ourselves being a part of. So that's one of the things we need to do to sort of create a new alternative.
So I want to ask one more question and then get the audience in on this. So that, and at Aspen, the audience is always as important as the speaker. I can't wait to see the dialogue that comes. But I have to ask you this because I'm hearing echoes of Dr. King. And the way I'm hearing it is that you're reminding us that we need to have and can have a revolution of our consciousness, and that such a revolution can then lead to many other advances. Dr. King was a Christian prophet. You grew up in a Christian household. You made a turn when you were 11 away from that part of your upbringing and your identity. But yet I still hear spirituality in your identity. Am I hearing something that's there, or is there something different that's there?
No, you're definitely hearing something that's there, and I would just, maybe a slight expansion. Spirituality, and I'm very interested in religion, but spirituality is not religion. And I would say every society, in fact, let me step back even further. Excuse me. I say, and I say to my staff, as Ashley can attest to, we just had a big meeting on belonging. I said, we don't have to create belonging, it's here. What we have to do is acknowledge it. What we have to do is organize our politics, our stories, our institutions, our culture to celebrate that we belong. We don't have to create connectedness. What COVID tried to teach us, among other things, is that we're powerfully interconnected. And what we tried to do in response to COVID is like, okay, sever the connection. Ground all the planes. Let's build walls. Let's keep out those people. And literally, in late November, early December, when they said there's this virus in Wuhan, China, but it's not in the United States, I said to a number of people, it's already here. And nothing we were able to do could effectively separate, quarantine for 5 days, no, for 10 days, wear a mask, wear 2 masks. And all those things probably helped. But what COVID was doing was showing just how powerfully on a physical level, we're interconnected. Singapore had one of the best responses to COVID of any country. Got everybody, whatever, all the protocols. The Singaporean authoritarian government was good at sort of issuing orders and getting it done. It was almost zero. And then all of a sudden, it reappeared in Singapore. What happened? The benefits they extended, the protocols they used was for Singaporeans. The workers in Singapore are not Singaporeans. So they created it for the middle class and not for everybody. And it came right back. That's a powerful lesson. That's a beautiful lesson. That's showing us how deeply we are interconnected. And as I was saying to you, Dan, James Baldwin talks about this. He says, we're all interconnected, hopelessly and forever. He said, some of my countrymen find that unfair. And at times, so do I. But none of us can do anything about it. So we are connected. So let's stop fighting it. I mean, think about it. What does a segregated school mean? Except those people don't belong in my neighborhood. Segregated communities. What does redlining mean? So it's not just an idea. We create structures so that then our daily movement reflects the structures we created. We don't have to think about them. So yes, to me, this is powerfully grounded in spirituality. I wrote a book, Racing to Justice, and I have a chapter in there, Lessons from Suffering. And I talked about all the major religions actually grapple with some aspect of that. It's not just a Christian idea. I gave a talk on this years ago, and some of my Buddhist friends said, this is really beautiful, but will the Catholics understand it? Because they were seeing it as a Buddhist concept, not a Christian concept. It's a human concept. It's who we are. And it will take on different expressions. And part of those expressions we may have to come back and revisit. But that's beautiful, that we are interconnected. The virus didn't say, Dan, before I infect you, are you Buddhist or Christian? It didn't matter. You're human. And the interconnectedness goes across humanity. It doesn't stop at ideological barriers. It doesn't stop at borders. It doesn't stop at walls. Our connection is real. And as we sort of watch climate change, participate in climate change, cause climate change, again, what's going on in China will show up in Aspen. That's the lesson. And yet we still no, this is an American problem. And the Chinese get mad at us and say, okay, we're not going to talk to you about climate change anymore. Really?
Thank you. Let me open it up. We're going to bring mics around because we're webcasting this, so we want to be able to capture the questions on the recording.
I want to personally thank you for your comments today, but I'm a little perplexed about, you talk about distractions, mistakes, interconnection, and then we have to think about the Supreme Court. And you talk about the Americans for Disabilities, which came out of the Supreme Court in 14th Amendment and doing the right thing. How do you put all your thoughts together and teaching your students of what you want them to believe in when we can't believe in some of the things that are coming out of the Supreme Court, and we might be 10 years from now still thinking the same thing?
All right. Well, thanks for the question. Supreme Court's a problem. I mean, there are many problems in the United States. Supreme Court is just one of them. The right wing for 20 or 30 years have been on a tear of actually taking over the Supreme Court. So Dan mentioned there's certain people who are consciously working to change things. I was talking to Andrea earlier today, and we're talking about some people actually don't believe all people count. They're saying that. They're not mincing words. It's like, what are you talking about equality? Why do you keep talking about equality? There's some people, there's some groups that are better than others. So it's not an easy road. That's what they believe. What do we believe? And a lot of people are just struggling, trying to make sense of things. And so I think it's important to actually engage those people. None of us have complete knowledge. And we may have to have a 10-year strategy. There's some indication that the evangelical conservative whites want a country that's just for white Christians. And that's what the court reflects. And so talking about belonging and us being connected doesn't say that therefore we can just relax. It tells us how to do our work. It tells us the direction of our work. And also we're imperfect. We're all imperfect. We'll make mistakes. But one thing that we do hold on to is that even if someone radically disagrees with us, you know, I mean, to me, some of this is mind-boggling. Right? There was this young man who was running from the police and got shot 60 times. They fired 90 bullets. He was unarmed. How do you shoot someone 60 times? Right? So we have to stop that. But you still have to hold on to the humanity of the police. You still have to hold on to the humanity of Clarence Thomas. Just get him off the court.
This is Evan Zislis, who leads our emerging work here to build a permanent structure in the Aspen Institute that exists in a reciprocal relationship with the communities well beyond the city of Aspen and the Roaring Fork and Colorado River Valleys, and to be a partner to all in trying to create more equity, more justice, more flourishing. Evan.
Thanks, Dan. I've had it's an honor to be here, thank you. I've had conversations with my very good friend Akaya Winwood from Oakland, who I believe you know, about cultural humility. I wonder if you could talk about the concept of cultural humility in the context of the current political landscape.
It's a great question. So I think we have to have both humility and tenacity at the same time. And both, certainly tenacity, should not be organized around that frail creature we call the ego. But the problems are huge. And to be willing to say, we can do it, not I can do it, we can do it, if we turn toward each other instead of turning on each other. So that's the tenacity. Where's the humility? I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea how to do it. That's the humility. So the we, and when I mean we, I don't mean Black America, white America, rich America. I mean we, all of us together. And that's where the possibility and the work comes from. That's a big lift, I know that. And I study this stuff all the time. And I have to have the humility to say, I don't know what I'm doing. But it doesn't stop me from doing it. Because I'll do it and I'll make mistakes, and maybe you'll help me see those mistakes and learn from those mistakes, and I hope you do. What we have to avoid, though, is when I make a mistake, is you go and say, Professor Powell's an asshole. Look what he did. And I worry too much as in our discussions right now, we have no compassion for the person making a mistake, especially the person that's trying. And I want to be clear, it's not the purview of any one group to do this. It's all of our responsibility. And we're not all the same. We're not all situated the same. Some of us have more resources than others. You know, I have a fairly large staff. Gives me more responsibility. But everyone has a role. So I think that sometimes it's easy if you have a little more influence, a little more resources, and you study the issues like, I know, instead of, no, we know for this time. Because even what we know for this time may change when the times change. So knowledge is always provisional, situational, and it's something that's held collectively. It's a different way of actually approaching knowledge. We were talking about this earlier. Knowledge is always local. I'll give you one quick story. I lived in Africa, and my partner and I were in Africa, and we were sort of, we were good Americans. We care about the environment, so we planted a garden, and the indigenous people, Africans, they planted gardens too. But first they burned all the things on their land. And we said, they didn't go to college. They don't have fancy degrees. They don't know about, how to take care of the environment. But we won't say anything. We'll just plant our garden and we'll let them plant their garden. And so 3 or 4 months later, our garden is growing, their garden is growing, and then something happened. The rains came, and then came the ants. And it's like a Fellini movie. There were miles, I kid you not, there were miles and miles of ants. And they ate everything in their path. Our gardens was reduced to nothing. And they came to our neighbor's garden, and they got to where it was burnt, and they went around. It's like, why didn't somebody tell us?
Let me look over on this side of the room, all the way back there. Yes.
Thanks for being here. This is wonderful. You mentioned co-design as a process and maybe a theory, I think, here still. And one of the structural pieces that we run into when we work in co-design is the necessity for ceding power and sharing power in a really equitable way. And I wonder if you could just speak to that, because it's something that at my organization and in our valley, we think we co-design a lot, and then we really struggle with that ceding power.
Right, a great question. We were talking about this earlier, about power, and there's different ways of thinking about power. There's power in terms of hierarchy and top-down, and there's power that's distributive. And so we're talking about distributive power. And it doesn't mean giving up what you know. Sometimes in our effort to sort of see the reality that we have, maybe too much of something, it's like, that famous, now frequently said thing, the community knows what it needs. It knows what, actually it's not true. They know something. If I have gas, and so I have a little pain in my chest from gas, and I go to the doctor, and I say, doctor, I need some prescription strength Tums, because I have a serious case of gas. And the doctor says, okay, I'm giving you a prescription of Tums. And I go home and die that night from a heart attack. My family might come back and say, we're suing that doctor. I say, why not? Why are you suing the doctor? Because John went in there with heart pain and got Tums. The doctor could say, well, it's John's body. He asked for Tums. But the doctor potentially knows something, and maybe they should engage me around and say, well, okay, maybe you have gas, but maybe you have something else. Let's go back and forth. Let me bring my experience, my millions of dollars worth of machines that you don't have at your house, and then we have a discussion about it. I'm not just going to, so part of it is coming to the conversation with what you know, but also provisionally. And provisionally, not just about the thing, because we work a lot with corporations, and they'll say, we want to help the community. And I say, that's great. Do you want the community to help you? We want to help the Black community in Oakland with housing. That's great. Do you want the Black community to help you with your new AI? So if you really are co-creating, it's not co-creating in this little corner, it's co-creating. And we work with a community in Richmond, California, mainly Black and Latino, and there's a multi-billion-dollar development they wanted to go in. And one of the foundations said, OBI, other than belonging, help the community with this, and we'll support it. I said, great. So we need a soil expert. And I said, we didn't put that in. I'm not a soil expert. This is right on a marsh. And then we said, we need an environmental lawyer. There's an environmental impact statement that was over 300 pages. The community has 60 days to respond. And so saying they could respond. And then finally, we said, we need for the community to hire a developer. And this was the California Endowment, which is the largest foundation in California. And they said, you keep coming back asking for more stuff. I said, you said you want the community to participate. What do they need? What are the resources they need to really participate? That was 10 years ago. that developer is still working with the community. The community, and I was on the first call, and it was funny, it's because the developers using all these big words, many of which I didn't understand, and I was feeling bad for the community. It's like, I'm sorry that this white developer is using all these big words. They were elated. It's like, yeah, we love this guy. We've never had someone work for us. So co-creating is not just throwing people together, co-designing. It really means people have different expertise. You got to make sure that that expertise is distributed in a way that people can participate effectively.
Question right here.
John, I was interested in your comments about the future. My question is really about young people. And with your knowledge and experience today, what advice would you give yourself as a 13-year-old?
Well, I'm sure you've seen some of the studies that this surprised people, that the mental toll that the reaction to COVID is much greater in young people than older people. And we missed that initially because we were focusing on older people dying and having physical, biological response, but the psychological response is much more driven into young people. And resiliency, we just had an event around helping people come together. So I would really, want to listen to young people. I also want to listen to people who don't agree with me. And this is part of the research we do. Our research is all applied. We're trying to understand something. And so the first thing is to really listen. The WHO came to us and asked for help getting some information out to the Black community. And we agreed to help. But the first thing we did is that we have to listen. And listen without telling them that they're wrong. They're worried about the Tuskegee study that happened years ago. We're not those crews. Okay, so you tell them that they're wrong to be worried. You tell them that they're wrong to have fear. So I would create space to listen, but also to have an on-ramp for some possibilities. Because one of the things that happens a lot when people are staying within their bubble, they reinforce each other. So if I'm depressed and all my friends are depressed, we can talk all night. At the end of the night, we're going to be more depressed. So it's important for people to have communities, but it's important to have communities that can help people see possibilities that they might not otherwise see. And if you can integrate that into their educational practice, if you can integrate that into something that's not too formal, because oftentimes when we bring people together around problems, it's a downer. It's like, man, things are screwed. Yeah, I know. Yeah, and you're never gonna get a job. Yeah, I know. And school costs $1,000 a day. Wow. Yeah, you're never gonna. It's like, we should just give up. Yeah, here, pass the joint. So that may be a view, but it's like engaging with some possibilities. And so we actually talk about birds have two wings. They have grief, they have concerns, they have depression on one wing. They have joy, they have hope, they have possibility on the other. You have to make sure both of those wings are functioning and create a space where they can function. So what we do a lot at the Institute is have cultural events. And I know we're out of time, so I'll just give you one quick example. The movie Black Panther came out. Fortunately, it was filmed in Oakland. The director was from Oakland. We rented out the theater. We'd never gotten a grant from a foundation to do this. We just did it and gave the tickets away. Probably 70% of the people in the theater were Black. Probably 60% of those were males. And the age range was the average was probably 16. Some a little older, some a little younger. And then we had, when the director came to one of our events, it was so powerful. And one man who was like, I think 22, he talked afterwards, and he was crying. And he said, I'm 22 years old. This is the first time I've been to something where someone's on a screen who looks like me and they're positive. He said, it's the first time that I've asked to come to some community event where it's not about someone getting shot or someone getting evicted or something bad happening. So something good is happening. And for the next month, everybody was walking around saying, Wakanda, Wakanda, Wakanda. It was a cultural event. And so part of it is creating those spaces, not to ignore all the hard stuff, but there's some beautiful stuff as well. So to make sure there's space for that. And so those are some of the things I do, really listen, but also try to create a space where people can engage in stuff that's replenishing and fulfilling.
You know, what's so powerful about that example you gave is that director also made Fruitvale Station. He is both wings.
He is both
You know, it's
wings,
beautiful. So we don't want to stop, but we have to. I wonder if you would do one thing for the audience, since you said that half of your bed is full of books. Are there any books that you have read on your journey or that you're reading now that you would recommend to us?
Thanks for the question. So you have to read Racing to Justice, I'm just saying. And I'm a little behind, but I'm actually writing a second edition.
Here it is.
I'm writing a second edition right now. Part of it depends on your interests. I mean, I'm interested in everything, right? If you like science fiction, I'd say The Three-Body Problem, which is phenomenal. It's written by a Chinese science fiction writer, and it's from that perspective. So the whole thing is, anyway, that's sort of interesting. But I'm also reading The Future Religion by Roberto Unger, who talks about the need for a new religion in the 21st century. He's The Future of Religion by Roberto Unger. I'm also reading The Dawn of Everything, which is a tome, but he rewrites, the two writers, they rewrite what's happening. Our understanding of the past basically is wrong, they say, which affects our ability to understand and imagine the future. So those are some of the things that come to mind. But I think obviously people have interests, and even there, if you can, read with other people. Because I think part of belonging is to find ways that are not too difficult to be with and celebrate each other. At our conferences, we have big conferences, 3,000 and 4,000 people. In our breaks, we don't say self-care. We buddy people up, and we say, over the next 2 days, we want to make sure that you take care of each other. And it could be, do you feel like, do you need a neck rub? Do you need some water? Shall we take a walk? Do you need to be left alone? So anyway, I think it's almost less important than you read than how you approach it and who you approach it with.
What a beautiful answer. Thank you so much.